This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Well, tonight, a 13-year-old mystery solved. In 1996, some German tourists drove into Death Valley and vanished without a trace. Recently, a team of off-duty Riverside County rescuers made a major discovery. News Channel 3's Rodney Wardle has an exclusive interview with a local man who helped solve that mystery. It's a story you'll only see on News Channel 3.
Cornelia Meyer, her young son, her boyfriend Egbert Rimkus, and his son disappeared in Death Valley in July 1996. Lost for 13 years, until Les Walker and fellow rescuer Tom Mahood made an important find.
I couldn't believe that we'd actually came upon the remains.
For 2 months, the Riverside County rescue workers spent their off time researching the mysterious disappearance of the German tourists.
Try to get into their mind where they would have gone having left their van in this wash in Death Valley and where they would have gone from there.
These pictures taken by Walker show a wine bottle he found along one of the paths they may have used after their van got stuck in the sand. He also found papers written in German and a wallet, passport, and ID belonging to Miss Myers. Walker believes the remains he found near the wallet are hers. The FBI flew in the next day to begin searching for the others.
More of an educated assumption and scenario, and the fact that we hit it right on the head, it was more of a surprise to us. And actually it was nice to be able to bring some closure to the German families.
Cornelia Meyer's father emailed Walker to say thank you for finding his daughter after all these years. And the father hopes for the best as the search for the other 3 victims begins again. Rodney Wardle, News Channel 3 HD, Idlewild.
From Ebons, They Knew the Unknown, Chapter 11. Thomas Edison, a machine to contact the dead. Strange myths grow up around every great man, and Thomas Alva Edison was no exception. Most American school children learn that young Edison became deaf when a trainman slapped his ears in punishment for letting Edison's laboratory aboard the train explode. That's a myth. Actually, Edison grew partially deaf after a childhood attack of scarlet fever. What no school child ever encounters is a reality stranger than myth, that of Edison's experimentation in psychic research. Although Edison was never able to demonstrate telepathy experimentally, he never lost interest in it. A New Jersey psychiatrist, Dr. Berthold E. Schwartz, finds evidence that Edison may have been telepathic himself. Edison's deafness was an asset for the long periods of concentration, free from distraction, that produced his brilliant insights. Schwartz suggests that Edison's habit of catnapping between long hours of work may have enabled him to enter an altered state of consciousness receptive to telepathic impressions. It is even possible that Edison may have been picking the brains of other inventors, or so it sometimes seemed to him and his associates. This telepathic leakage among coworkers was noted by the Irish mystic and poet George William Russell. He narrated one incident in his book, The Candle of Vision. Once in an idle interval in my work, I sat with my face pressed in my hands, and in that dimness, pictures began to flicker in my brain. I saw a little dark shop, the counter before me, and behind it, an old man fumbling with some papers. A man so old that his motions had lost swiftness and precision. Deeper in the store was a girl, red-haired, with gray watchful eyes fixed on the old man. I saw that, to enter the shop, one must take 2 steps downwards from a cobbled pavement. I questioned the young man, my office companion, who was then writing a letter, and I found that what I had seen was his father's shop. All my imaginations were not imaginations of mine in any true sense, for while I was in a vacant mood, my companion had been thinking of his home, and his brain was populous with quickened memories, and they invaded my own mind. According to Joseph Dunninger, the famous mentalist with whom Edison frequently corresponded, Edison had experiences where he would concentrate on someone, and they would come and see him, or concentrate on doing a thing, and it would pass on to the person it was intended for, without any verbal communication. Dunninger remarked that inventors in general were often intrigued with telepathy, since they themselves receive impressions or gain ideas that seem to come from some outside source. Dunninger also claimed that Edison had actually showed him the mysterious apparatus for contacting the dead. There is no other record of anyone else ever seeing it, or even records of its construction during Edison's lifetime. By 1935, when Norman Speeden, now the supervisory museum curator of the Edison National Historic Site, made a search for clues to this work, he found nothing. We have never been able to find anything in Mr. Edison's notebooks concerning this research, and have never found any apparatus that seemed to be constructed for this purpose. Speeden speculates that Edison might have had in mind using a sensitive electrical valve or vacuum tube as the essential element for simplifying very delicate vibrations. Speeden's research, however, was not in vain, for he validated Edison's own attempt to communicate at the time of his death, 3:24 a.m., Sunday, October 18, 1931. Three of Edison's associates noted that their clocks had each stopped simultaneously at 3:24 a.m. The larger grandfather clock in Edison's own laboratory stopped 3 minutes later. Edison, who was called the Old Man by his men, had once recorded the popular song Grandfather's Clock with the words, "But it stopped short, never to go again," when the old man died. Thus ended Edison's attempts at spiritual communication, or did it? For an even stranger story began to unfold one night in 1941, 10 years after Edison's death. In the seance room of a New York medium, Mary Olson, her sitters that night were J. Gilbert Wright, the General Electric researcher who had discovered putty, and his associate, Harry C. Gardner. Wright, who had worked with the late Charles Steinmetz, the noted electrical engineer and inventor, many years before, had long been interested in psychic research and spiritualism. The third purported spirit visitor that night was Thomas Edison, who spoke through the medium. Almost casually, Edison remarked, "I think it might interest you to see the blueprint of the device that I was working on before I came here." Wright and Gardner nearly fell over themselves in their interest. To their astonishment, Edison gave them the names and addresses of 3 people who might have the blueprint. Through one of them, Wright and Gardner were able to obtain the only drawing of Edison's idea extant. We don't, of course, know if that drawing was genuine. The apparatus depicted consisted of an aluminum trumpet, an aerial, a microphone, and a chemical electrolyte to generate an electrical current for amplifying the supposed etheric waves from the spirit world. The 3 people whose names were given by Edison had formed a society shortly after his death and tried out the device, but it didn't work. In Wainwright Evans' account of his adventure, Fate, April 1963, no mention is made of how the group acquired the blueprint in the first place. Edison, mindful of patent litigations, was well known to be very secretive with his ideas before placing a patent upon them. Another suspicious factor is the lack of a vacuum tube, a more sensitive device with which Edison had been familiar. Whether or not that really was Edison's device, Wright and Gardner also found out that it didn't work. However, Wright and Gardner went on to perform further experimentation with a device for amplifying spirit voices in the presence of a physical medium. They felt confident that they would succeed, since they were getting help from the spirit of Charles Steinmetz. As Wright told the story, he had met Gardner by following instructions from Steinmetz, given through the medium, Arthur Ford. Wright claimed that their device, using a sound box and a loudspeaker, was perfected with further advice from Edison and Steinmetz. When they tried it out with the medium Margaret Lewis, with the loudspeaker in full light, Wright testified that the voice of Steinmetz came through loud and clearly. Unfortunately, however, they were unable to carry out further experiments. When Wright died in 1959, he left behind a thick notebook of his tests. It will depend on future investigators to decide whether Wright may have been the victim of his own credulity, or if he had actually perfected Thomas Edison's dream and made a machine to contact the dead.
Welcome to episode 22 of season 1 of True Crime XS. Our hunt for where the bodies are buried of the victims of this killer is coming to a close, but we still have a few more things to talk about today. And one of the things that I found along the way was that movie that the killer referenced in his interviews, which was ironically titled Stockholm Sweetie, one of the lines from the killer's suicide note. So I'll drop a couple of links to the 2 parts of that short film into the show notes. But I do want to address the fact that we don't believe the suicide note is a suicide note at all. we believe it's song lyrics written in the style of the band Rammstein, or Rammstein, depending on how you pronounce it. And we are focusing on only one missing persons case in this episode, but a lot of information about that particular case. And we did wrap up 2011 and 2012 by researching a couple of strange things. One was the disappearance of Lauren Spear, and another was a man who was found to have committed suicide in Colorado.
I want to go to Lauren Spear first. Because she comes up, so suppose she comes up in American Predator, and then other audio sources have sort of picked up on people picking up on her and putting her in there because of these toll passes in Indiana where the killer's like mom and a couple of sisters live during 2011. She goes missing from Indiana University. At one point we looked at her and we kind of went, is that a Shaggy? Was she so drunk that she stumbled away from her friends and like he was like driving through, right place, right time, and grabs her? I guess ultimately we can't rule that completely out.
Well, I actually have a very interesting theory on this, and you may not play this, and that's fine. It may be too much for where you're going with at this particular time. The reason Lauren Spear comes up as like such a plausible possibility is because what are the chances that Israel Keys was in the state at the time she went missing? And she vanished because, you know, we're almost 9 years later and she's still gone. And it not be him, right? So that's sort of where I go, well, what are the chances? Well, in the event that Lauren Spear were to have been taken by somebody she didn't know, so a stranger abduction, which is like the absolute rarest abduction to happen. Usually people who are taken are
spouses, parents, people they're dating.
Right. And so typically and here's, my theory is that in the event Israel Keys didn't take Lauren Spear, which I don't think he did because I can't find how that would have happened. Okay, I can't figure it out. But in the event it was not him, because he was in the state and it would have been more than likely him if a stranger abduction was going to occur to her, I think somebody she knew did something to her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically it goes like this. If it's a stranger abduction, then we just aren't imagining how he did it, and it's likely him. If it's a different type of abduction, we would call that either an acquaintance or a known to her or a circle of friends abduction. Then he has nothing to do with it, and that's where they need to be looking.
My thought is, and I guess maybe one day somebody will be able to analyze this information. It probably won't be us. We probably won't be alive. But, like, one day I feel like statisticians, criminologists, statisticians will look back and say, it is completely implausible that 2 stranger abductions occurred that night in that state and they vanished for 25 years or what. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I just can't imagine somebody else was operating like Keys operated, because she's been missing a long time now. And, I think it's a good, like, I could make it fit. I could make the timeline fit. I could make a lot of things fit. And she was a good example of a Shaggy, which would just be somebody who, they were partying and then they were wandering around. It happens to the best of us, but then I started I just can't imagine if Keys was in the mood to kill someone and he had a plan, which of course he would have a plan. I don't really see him taking a chance on possibly finding somebody. Because what were the chances that he would find somebody? I don't really know, honestly, but he makes the comment about the remote locations that other people go. But he also says, you have a good idea of what you're going to find there.
Right. So if you go to a college campus, you know what's going to be at the college campus.
Right. But I don't know that necessarily applies because, I try to make it work in other scenarios where, for example, little girls go missing from their neighborhoods. You would know what you were going to find if you were driving around in a neighborhood, but it's not a remote area.
Right. Well, I see where you're going with that, and I agree with you, but I do think he was not. He describes having his stuff with him to be able to take advantage of an opportunity.
Right.
Like, even as early as Montreal, he says, I had my stuff with me, which he later or earlier had described as, he said, I guess you'd call it a rape kit.
And it wasn't just missing persons that we looked at in 2010. There were other interesting crimes as well.
One of the things I had looked at with this killer was whether or not he might have been the Geezer Bandit or some of the Geezer Bandits' Southern California bank robbery. And the reason I looked at that is because they timed, interestingly, with some other things. I think those crimes are a little more sophisticated than he might have gotten into. I can't say for sure it's not him. The reason I looked at him, there were two sets of those robberies. The ones I'm talking about are the Southern California ones. The other robberies are on the other coast. But here's why they were interesting. Because after he was caught with Samantha Koenig and all of that went down, and so that's March of 2012, the Geezer Bandit vanished. They're gone. They've never been seen or heard from again. And it could be they were really an older person, or they died, or it could be that it wasn't all of those robberies. One of them did take place in Southern California right around the time of this case that interested Meg so much. And that part stuck out to me because from 2009 to 2011, it's a very active, sporadic series of bank robberies, supposedly all connected. We know the killer was robbing banks, so we couldn't really figure out how or why. Those were super interesting to me, and I never did make a decision on those. In fact, the Geezer Bandit, as far as I'm concerned, if you went back through that evidence, I think you might discover some connection to this killer on a couple of those. I just don't think it would be all of them. And I know overall they seem too sophisticated for him, but I thought, what if he saw them and then started to copy them in some way, shape, or form? Because we know he had masks. We know he had used disguises. A lot of the disguises he used, he said, weren't very elaborate. That's when he was talking about using human hair and dust mask and like things that he had with his person. It is something interesting that takes place in the course of this killer's crime spree. I was talking to my mom. My mom is enthralled with how we find things, and I was describing to her what Meg and I did, and she had an opinion on that I probably should share.
And here's that opinion that I'm talking about, because I figured, why not share it with you guys? Specifically, this is an opinion about the art of finding things that other people can't find.
And he asked how I did it, and he asked me if I was divining. Have you ever heard of something called divining?
I have.
I don't know what that is without Googling it. I felt like he was insulting me, maybe.
No. Okay. Sometimes is that where they go around trying to find something? Is that what he was talking about?
You take a stick or a rock or whatever. I don't know what it is. You take something made out of one thing, like one particular material, and you take it to an area, and
you go up the area, and you get some sort of vibe. It's a special thing that some people can do.
But it's bullshit, right? Overall.
No, it's not.
But you're saying it really works.
Some people have a knack, for lack of a better word. Some people have you and Meg have this odd thing that y'all do.
What do you mean?
Well, again, it's like finding a piece of the puzzle that was there all along, but nobody picked up that piece of puzzle and put it where it needed to go.
Well,
you both have that. I have that in a different way. And again, don't ask me to explain it because I can't explain it, but I know you and Meg have it. And again, it's something most people are going to look at you and say, we don't understand what you're saying. We don't understand what you've done. And it's just something you can't explain it to them. It's just something you have figured out. It's almost like you have picked up stray bits and pieces, and you have figured out where they go. I know you have it, and I know Meg has.
Well, he used a specific example that made me, I don't know what he meant exactly, but he said a lot of people want to solve a thing. A lot of people want to find a thing, and you just do it.
Well, I hate to call it what I'm going to call it, and you'll probably poo-poo this. It might be a psychic thing.
No, yeah, I don't believe that at all. But
well,
I'm not going to wait.
I don't care what you believe. I'm saying it may very well could be call that something. It's almost, and I hate to call it this. It's almost like a gift.
I'm not going to insult your belief there, but like I have always been able to look at it. I understand what you're saying. I almost understand how, from an outsider's perspective, it could look like that. I have always been able to go, you know what I did? I heard that there was a question about where this blue item was. So I asked another question, and that was, well, where did you see it last? And they said, well, Billy saw the blue item at the store. So I go to the store, and I say, did you see Billy? And they say, yes. I say, did he have a blue item with him? And they say, well, look at this camera footage. And I look at the camera footage, and in it, I see Billy comes into the store. He has a blue item. And then on him getting back into his car, there's a glimpse where he doesn't have the blue item anymore. So did he keep it on his person, or is it in the store? And I go look around, and half the time it's in the store. That's how I found it. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it with Billy and his blue item. But does that make sense to you, like how I see it?
No, because most people cannot walk back going backward in order to find what they're looking for. You can do it, and Meg can do it, but not everybody can do that. I can't always do that. But I'm telling you, I don't care what you say. I think sometimes it's a psychic thing, and I know you say you don't believe in that, and that's fine that you don't believe in it.
It's less that I don't believe in it, and more that I think there's another explanation.
Well,
but
it may be another explanation to it.
Well, in this instance, the immediate instance of what I'm doing, I didn't see an image. I heard words and repeated words, like not just one person, like about 3 people kept saying this particular set of words that all meant the same thing. And Meg said something that was really interesting. She said it's almost like they're all speaking in code and nobody has the...
Catches it. You're right. That's exactly it. Most people don't zoom in to what they hear enough to know that it might be what they're saying might be important, or what they did might be important. I mean, you have got, on this stuff that y'all are doing, y'all have got stuff that you're going back through. People who have been interviewed, interrogated, reports, and they have looked at it and looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. They have not spotted what y'all can come along and say, oh, this might be important.
I think
you can't do that with everything. You can't do that with everything. And because you go back and pick something out, and then something else from that, something else pops up, and you kind of match it or go back and figure out, well, this could be telling us something. And you go back and find out it's something else similar, or maybe just like it was said years ago. The same person said something similar to it.
Well, I was looking for this guy in 2008. I just didn't know who he was. I just had
a suspicion that somebody was doing all this.
DNA evidence and a genealogy website helped catch the suspected Golden State Killer. Last month, investigators arrested a 72-year-old man. It could be the dramatic end to a 4-decades-old search for the suspect, which got us thinking, whatever happened to the cold case of the geezer bandit, who may not even be a geezer? And could advanced technology ever help find him? He was the most elusive senior citizen during a 2-year crime spree. The bank robber the FBI nicknamed the Geezer Bandit because of his geriatric appearance. The geezer, who may have actually been a much younger person using a professional-grade prosthetic mask like one of these, robbed 16 banks from San Diego to San Luis Obispo from 2009 to 2011. 11 of those happening right here in San Diego County.
Profiling, as you understand now, is a pretty big spectrum.
We asked National University professor and professional criminal profiler Jack Hamlin how this person, 7 years later, has become the modern-day D.B. Cooper.
We have an expression in law enforcement, we only catch the dumb ones.
The geezer was one of the best, performing almost mistake-free and seemingly very sophisticated. The mask may not have been his only disguise. He was said to also wear gloves. There was no known getaway vehicle. The robberies were during off-peak hours and with little security. And 5 of those robberies were on a Friday, payday.
Is it possible that this person had some background in law enforcement?
It's certainly somebody that understands how things work. It's not these robberies weren't random. He's figured out a time when security is low. He's figured out a time when there's going to be plenty of cash, Fridays.
The geezer developed a cult following with thousands of followers on Facebook. T-shirts are still available celebrating Geezer for President. But his last robbery was December of 2011, the only time a dye pack was used, exploding and making the money useless, and possibly his disguise, too. We haven't heard from the geezer since.
I don't see this person suddenly having an epiphany and saying, it's over with, I don't need to do it anymore.
Hamlin says people like this need the rush, and they rarely just quit. But the one mistake the geezer made on that final robbery was dropping a day planner, which he carried as part of his disguise. If it holds his DNA, Hamlin says there may be an option to use a genealogy website, like investigators did to catch the person they believe is the Golden State Killer.
Now you've got this public DNA base, and if there's some way they can tap into that, I mean, the sky's the limit on some of these cases.
But Hamlin does add that's a pretty slippery slope legally when it comes to privacy rights. We asked the FBI about this case, and a spokesperson told us they are always willing to work with the community on any information that might lead to an arrest of the Geezer Bandit. If you would like to take a closer look at the Geezer Bandit case, we have created this interactive timeline. You can find it right now on 10news.com.
Breckenridge Peak 6 up in Colorado, in the mountains. This is the area between Copper Mountain Resort and Breckenridge. They call it the Sky Chute. This is in the Y Chute. On July 10th, 2016, there's a couple of hikers up there, and they find human remains. During that search, which takes place over the next 30 days, they find his clothes, they find his outdoor gear, extra clothing, and all of his personal items, and a handgun that's been painted. This guy is somewhere between 30 and 50, they think. He could be, I think they marked him at one point that he could be as young as like 20, 23, and as old as like retirement age. They don't know how tall he was because they don't have enough remains. The clothing were all size men's large. He's wearing size 11 boots. They knew that he was experienced in backcountry traveling, and he was a smoker. He's wearing a black snowmobile suit and a hat, and he has glasses, but there was nothing identifying on him. There's no driver's license, there's no wallet, there's no car keys, nothing. In his little stash, they find water bottles, and the water bottles lead them to think that they were manufactured within 4 weeks of February 2012, 2 of the bottles. So they sort of put a time frame on them. And I wondered, like, is that guy somehow the other person, if there is one, or did he know? Because if you were to know that someone you had done something with was arrested, it's a long hike to get up there. But, you know, he was arrested in Texas, you're talking middle of the country. And this guy basically stepped off the trail and shot himself in the head. That's what it looks like. So why did he do that? I look at cases like that. That's a weird one to like he didn't want to ever be found. Why did he not ever want to be found? And I'm not saying it's even related to this. I'm just saying I had considered that possibility. Like maybe he did have some kind of partner in crime. And it ties back to that guy. Because that would have been within weeks of, it would have been within days of the arrest. And there was one more missing persons case this is from April 2012, technically. And they processed this guy's car. But the gist of it is, this is Bradley Trimble. So Bradley Trimble leaves Lubbock, Texas around February 14th. He told his girlfriend he's moving to Las Vegas, Nevada to earn his living as a gambler. And then there was apparently some emails sent. I don't know when or where or how. Can't get a copy of them presently. And there's an advisement on this, so technically it's not a missing persons case anymore. His vehicle is located between Nevada and Arizona. And the Arizona authorities have looked in the area for him. The reason it's technically not a missing persons case anymore is because they've located part of him, but not all of him. And I wondered, he kind of, in the pictures I found of him, he sort of has, the long blonde hair. And I was like, I wonder if he was, one of the Texas bodies. How do I, track that down? Because there's so many jurisdictions involved. You got Lubbock, Texas, and then there's Nevada authorities in Clark County, Nevada, and then Arizona. Although they say his last known location is Las Vegas, Nevada, so that falls under Clark County. But unfortunately, they don't have anything on him because they're saying where the partial remains were found in Arizona, they consider that to be his last known location. And Arizona considers Clark County to be his last known location, whereas actual last known physical sighting on paper is in Lubbock, Texas on February 14th, 2012. So that's another one that falls on the list. And I drove Meg nuts because I found a casino receipt in the middle of all this big fat pack of paperwork I got.
And now let's talk about the case of William Iwasco, our first bill for this episode.
I want to go back to a case that I came across very early on. If there were a pivotal moment, this would definitely be it. The 2010 case of William Michael Iwasco, or Bill. And while Bill's case has been touched on earlier, I wanted to quickly recap his case. Bill is 65 years old and lived in Georgia in 2010. He had worked as CFO for more than one company. At the time of his disappearance, he was working at a financial firm in Georgia. On June 23, 2010, Bill flew into LAX. He rented a car and he was headed to a vacant condo owned by one of his friends, with plans to go hiking at Joshua Tree National Park the following day, June 24, 2010. On the morning of Thursday, June the 24th, 2010, Bill drove his rental car. On the way to the park, according to his cell phone records, he made 2 calls. One was to the friend that he was staying at their condo, and the second was to Mary Winston, his fiancée, back home. During that phone call, he gave her the impression he may be going to Carey's Castle at Joshua Tree National Park, and Carey's Castle is an old miner's dugout, and it's in a place in the park where it's remote and it's not publicized for people to go there, sort of a secret. According to his fiance, he was in a good mood and she was hesitant about him going to that remote area of the park to go to Carey's Castle. Said, don't do that. But he didn't indicate that he was going to take her advice. He did tell her that he was going to be out of the park by 5 and he was planning on getting dinner, a restaurant between the park and back to the condo he was staying at, and that he would call her when he returned to his car when he was done hiking. She did not receive a call from him. She was back towards the East Coast. He's in California, so there'd be a time difference, and she had waited to hear from him, and I don't think she was concerned at first, but after he didn't ever call, she began calling him. His phone was acting like it was off, like going straight to voicemail, and by that time, the park was closed, and so the next morning, she called the ranger station, and she relayed the story to them, and they immediately went to go see if they could see signs of him and locate him. He had left a rough outline of an itinerary of the spots he was planning on visiting while he was at the park. So the rangers had that information to start with and began trying to locate where he may be. But they didn't have a whole lot to go off of because it was a leisurely trip. He was on his own. He could decide to venture wherever he wanted to go, but they did have a little bit of information to go off of. The Rangers, they started looking for his rental car. Finding his rental car at one of the trailhead areas where people can park would give them an idea of what vicinity of the park he was in. But they couldn't locate his car. They looked for the car all day on Friday, and they were unable to locate it. The following morning, which would be Saturday, June 26, 2010, the sheriff's office got involved. They were able to go to the condo where Bill was staying. They might have found some information, but I think it was just basically the information that Mary Winston had already given them that told them that he wasn't at the condo. His stuff was at the condo. The information they had, the only other place he would be the park. The park was the logical place they should be looking for him. The California Highway Patrol helicopter had been dispatched. Bill's rental car was located at Juniper Flats Trailhead on the afternoon of Saturday, June 26, 2010. So we have Bill flying into LAX on Wednesday, June 23, 2010, going to Joshua Tree National Park on Thursday, June 24, 2010, being missing all day Friday, June 25, 2010, without anyone being able to locate his car. Finally, on Saturday, June 26, 2010, a California Highway Patrol helicopter spots it at the Juniper Flats trailhead. So we've gone from Wednesday to Saturday. Bill was essentially unaccounted for after the phone calls that he made on Thursday morning in his rental car on his way to Joshua Tree National Park. The helicopter spots the car and the Rangers are dispatched to the location. And at the location, there are footprints outside of the car, but other than that, there's no signs that anything is necessarily amiss. Rangers began using the service roads to start looking for Bill around the area. Because his car was found later in the day, it isn't long before night begins to fall. They suspend the search as it's getting dark. In the process of suspending the search, someone sees off in the distance some light that they feel like might be somebody, namely Bill, out there. It was too far for them to get to safely at night, but the sighting was noted, and they felt like it was a good place to check the following day when the search resumed. Law enforcement stayed at the car overnight to secure the scene and in case he showed up. The following morning, Sunday, June 27th, 2010, search and rescue began. They started from his car using their knowledge and experience of the area and previous things that have happened. They searched the most likely areas they felt like a hiker would be found in the event that they had gotten lost or they had gotten hurt. They went to where someone had seen the lights the night before, and they did not find anything that aided in their search. Later that morning, somebody on the search team found a red bandana that was near Quail Mountain, and that was the only sign of Bill Owasco that has ever been found in the entire search, and they're not entirely sure if that's his bandana or not. A day of searching passes on Sunday. They don't find anything except the red bandana that might be Bill's. Then on Monday, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department has joined the Joshua Tree National Park Rangers in the search. And so now they've got law enforcement's assistance. They've got people hiking. They've got people on horseback. They have helicopters in the air, and they are using tracking dogs. And the tracking dogs indicated that Bill may have taken the California riding and hiking trail up to a point where it intersects with Juniper Flats Road, heads towards Quail Mountain where the bandana was found. That is pretty much a junction where he could have gone any way, and it would have led shortly to some sort of trail he could have been on, so it wasn't very helpful in determining where, if that was Bill's trail, where he went next. And the dogs lost the scent, and they couldn't provide a clue to that. Starting Saturday evening, searched for him all day Sunday. Sunday, now all day Monday, with additional parties assisting. In the evening on Monday, they are given information. Bill Owasco's phone pinged a cell phone tower in a city about 20 miles northwest of where his car was found. That happened at 6:30 a.m. on Sunday, which was the previous morning. And of course, when they find out that his cell phone pinged, it was hopeful that he might be found. So coming across this detail on Monday, the 28th of 2010, in the evening, the Joshua Tree National Park Rangers asked that a night helicopter with thermal imaging capabilities be dispatched to search the areas where Bill might be found. With those helicopters, everything below a certain degree is dark. Then anything above a certain degree, it shows up. It's prominent. So it would make the search very easy because human body temperature, a live human body's temperature, would show up on the thermal imaging. And so other than that, the only thing they're going to see is animals that have a certain body temperature. For whatever reason, that requisition didn't happen. The helicopter was not dispatched. I couldn't find any additional information as to why. The following day, which was Tuesday, June 29th, 2010, the same scent dog that had located the red bandana that was thought to be Bill Owasco's hit on 2 bottles of water that were found or hidden under a log. They were on or right off of a trail. A little later, a different hiker came forward who was not Bill Owasco and said that they were his water bottles. That cast doubt on the dog having identified the bandana as Bill's. That was never confirmed or found to be anybody else's, but because the dog hit on red bandana and the water bottles, and the water bottles were disproven to be Bill's, just made them wonder if the bandana was in fact his or not. The official search for Bill continued until July the 4th, 2010, before it was called off to be continued by the Park Service on an intermittent basis, which means anytime a Joshua Tree National Park Ranger is working and on patrol, they keep a lookout for any signs of a missing hiker. In this case, it would be Bill. On occasion, searchers did report unusual smells or even the, quote, stench of death, end quote, in different places around the park, but none of the reports ever led to Bill's remains being found. They were able to attribute some of the smells to animal carcasses that were found. Otherwise, the smells would dissipate or they would just be considered to be part of what you encounter in a national park. The investigators had been able to locate additional information from eyewitnesses to put together a better idea of what had happened. One of the things that I found so bizarre was that they had found several accounts about Bill's car that didn't make sense. They were unable to make the information from different places work together, and it looked like they just completely disregarded the situation with his car altogether. It was found at Juniper Flats Trailhead, and being parked in that area would have been consistent with where he had told Mary Winston he was going. The information that Mary Winston in turn relayed to the Rangers, and the Rangers used that information to start looking for the vehicle. In fact, all of the places that were on his rough itinerary of where he wanted to go at Joshua Tree National Park would have him being in the same general area, which was the upper middle section of Joshua Tree National Park. Checking relevant parking areas for all of the areas that he wanted to visit, it wasn't a lot of work. And so it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't have been checked before the helicopter spotted it on Saturday afternoon. Remember that after Mary Winston had reported Bill missing on Friday morning, the Rangers initially looked to find the vehicle before they started looking for the missing man. Because his car was in such an obvious location, why wasn't it found earlier? The search for Bill could have been started earlier. And of course, there's only two answers to that inquiry. It's either that the car was missed by whomever was searching for it visually on the ground, and it was missed numerous times as they made their way around the park looking for the vehicle, or the car wasn't there. And the car not being there adds a whole nother layer of where's Bill to the situation. But come July 4th, after additional information is gathered from eyewitnesses, it makes it seem far more likely that the car was there and then it wasn't there and then it was returned. And here's why. The only other hiker to visit Juniper Flats Trailhead on Thursday, June 24th, 2010, arrived at approximately 10:20 a.m. and there were no other vehicles parked in the parking lot. When that hiker returned between 5:30 and 6 p.m., there was an additional vehicle in the parking lot. It was parked parallel next to the curb on the north side of the parking area. He noted that it wasn't in one of the designated parking spots. That hiker also recalled a single set of boot prints leading to the old Juniper Flats Road. So according to the other hiker, Bill's vehicle was not in the parking lot where it was eventually found on Saturday before 10:20 a.m. Thursday, June the 24th. That leaves about a 2-hour gap between the time he was on the phone, and it would actually be more than that because we don't know when the car appeared there. We just know that it was not there at 10:20 a.m. So it would have been there earlier, and then it would have not been there, and then it would have been back again because it was there between 5:30 and 6 p.m. when the only other hiker that parked at the Juniper Flats Trailhead left on Thursday, June 24th, 2010. The next morning, a couple that visited the park to hike Ryan Mountain reported when they arrived at the Juniper Flats Trailhead at 8:45 a.m. on June 25th, 2010, a car fitting the description of Bill's rental car was parked parallel to the long curb that you head in at. It was passenger side to the curb, maybe a couple of feet from the curb. When the couple arrived back to the parking lot shortly before 10:30 a.m., they advised that there was another car parked head-in on the other side of Owasco's car, about 20 feet from the front of it. So essentially now we have information. Bill Owasco's rental car was not at the Juniper Flats Trailhead before 10:20 a.m. Thursday, June 24th, 2010. However, it was there between 5:30 and 6 p.m. that evening and had remained there, or it had left and come back by 8:45 a.m. on Friday, June 25th, 2010, according to eyewitness statements. By 10:30 a.m. on June 25th, 2010, there was a vehicle parked beside of Bill Owasco's rental car. About 3 hours after the couple saw the additional vehicle parked beside of it, one of the Joshua Tree National Park rangers did a check of the parking areas and reported that he didn't find Bill's rental car. On Saturday, June 26, 2010, the following morning at 9 a.m., Bill's rental car still not being located, the Joshua Tree National Park ranger went back out to check the trailhead parking lots again, and he specifically said there are no vehicles. At 1:45 p.m., just 4 hours after the report that there were no vehicles at the Juniper Flats Trailhead, an employee of the Joshua Tree National Park was leaving where she had given a presentation. She was leaving and she was looking for somewhere to have lunch, and knowing that the Juniper Flats Trailhead was usually deserted, she had planned to park there and eat her lunch. When she got there, she noticed from the road that there was a car in the parking lot, and wanting to have her privacy to have lunch, she kept driving. As her putting together information, she remembered and thought, oh, that was Bill Owasco's rental car. Of course, she didn't know that it was his rental car at the time, but Bill Owasco's rental car was parked And according to her, it was the only vehicle in the lot, and it was backed in and away from the curb at an angle. So her account of the location of the car contradicted the previous accounts of the vehicle being parked parallel to the curb. That employee, however, was able to mention that there was something yellow or orange on the dashboard of the vehicle, a detail that was correct. And the ranger taking the statement felt like if the car hadn't been parked the way she indicated it was parked, contrary to the other two accounts, there would have been no way she would have seen the color on the dashboard. And so that just further confused things for everyone. At around 5 p.m. that same day, the helicopter would observe Bill Owasco's car parked parallel to the curb and facing the trailhead, and that matched the description of how it was observed on Thursday by the other hiker and on Friday by the couple that parked in the same lot and were going hiking. I was able to locate one picture of Bill Owasco's car as it was found, and notably it was only a few inches from the curb, which is slightly different than what the couple had said they saw on Friday morning, the car being parked several feet from the curb. Their account was more similar to how the car was eventually found than the earlier account that day. Just to sort of sum up what I just said, Bill called his fiance on Thursday morning. Over 2 hours later, his vehicle was still not in the parking lot where it was ultimately found. There's no information that accounts for where he could have been during that time period. Having it not be there at 10:20 a.m. on Thursday, June 24th, 2010, the car is in the Juniper Flats parking lot on the evening of Thursday, June 24th, 2010, according to the only other hiker that parked in that parking lot that day. According to a couple who parked in the same parking lot the next day, Friday, June 25th, 2010, at 8:45 a.m., a vehicle was parked in the parking lot. It matched the description that was given by the hiker the previous day, except that the couple noted it was several feet from the curb. Except for the discrepancy that it was several feet from the curb, their account of where the car was is essentially the same as it was when it was finally located on Saturday, June 26th in the afternoon, evening time. However, we have an additional account from the couple stating that at 10:30, after they arrived at 8:45, went on their hike and returned at around 10:30, the car was there and that there was another vehicle parked very close to it, within 20 feet of it. There was no information given as far as any sort of eyewitness coming forward as being the other vehicle that the couple spotted next to Bill Owasco's rental. The couple leaves. Parking lot is checked by 1:30 shortly thereafter, sometime around 1:30, again on Friday, June 25th, 2010, by the park rangers, and there's no vehicles in the parking lot at that time. On Saturday, June 26th, there continues to be no vehicles in the Juniper Flats parking lot as of 9 a.m. when it's checked once again by the Joshua Tree National Park Rangers. Nearly 5 hours later, the car has reappeared and it's backed into a corner in a different position than it's seen by every other account of its presence. That account can't be completely disregarded because of information of something that was in the vehicle that was seen by the driver that they wouldn't have been able to see if the vehicle had been consistently parked the entire time. Less than 4 hours after that sighting of the vehicle is spotted by the California Highway Patrol helicopter, and the Joshua Tree National Park Rangers go out to where it's at, and it is back parallel to the curb as it had been spotted previously.
Why are we so focused on Bill Owasco's car? Well, we had some information related to the couriers that lined up with some of these vehicle shenanigans that were happening. Coupled with the cell phone ping, we were starting to think this was a victim of our killer. But I'd like you to keep in mind that we're just one episode away from revealing what I've promised will be a huge revelation in the genre of true crime.
So I looked at, like, we wrapped up 2011, we came back around, we just wanted to clear up if there was anything left in 2011, 2012. We've had long conversations about Lauren Spear, and I had looked at John LeBay's murder up in New Hampshire. And then as far as 2012 goes, I did have one more candidate that was a weird disappearance in 2012 that when I first covered 2012, as far as the paperwork goes, I didn't have access to anything. And I don't have access to all of it now, but I have a little more information. So that was sort of helpful. But Meg wanted to go back and just because we're doing Where the Bodies Are Buried, she wanted to know if we needed to take a look at Lauren Spear. So we did that as well, just as part of like a sort of a group wrap-up. And we were looking at the suicide note and some of the other aspects.
And it was during that wrap-up that I found out about the other Bill.
Well, one of the inconsistent things we ran into, the Azelle fire down in Arnetta South in Texas in 2012. One of the houses around the corner from the house he burnt down belonged to a guy named John Keyes. So along the way, we ran into this. We were never, I won't say we were never able to work out a consistent pattern, but one of the things, when Meg came across Bill Owasco, at first it was about how thorough the searches had been. Because, like, and not only that, we didn't have to do the work on it. Other people had already done the work and cited it. And then at least two of them had uploaded the work where we could get our hands on it. So we weren't filing all these FOIAs that we would have to have done. We just had the information, although it was a huge amount of data, like both storage capacity and to sort of digest. It could sound like we're repeating ourselves, but you sort of have to understand what you're looking at. And, you know, Meg does a very good job of sort of spoon feeding it to me at first. But it was a matter of I was looking at like huge amounts of data. What made Mr. Owasco's case so interesting was pulling out on a map. Meg discovered that the map showed her his car was found off of Keys View Road. It was found on the trailhead or the parking area of the trailhead, but that road is Keys View Road, which led us to a whole new thing, which is the other Bill. So there's Bill Owasco, and then there's Bill Keyes.
Visitors from all over the world come to experience the wonders of Joshua Tree National Park. They come for rock climbing, dark night skies, wildflowers, and to see the expansive desert landscape. But in the 19th century, people were drawn to this area for very different reasons. Rugged individuals came to try their luck at cattle ranching, mining, and homesteading. The story of William F. Keyes and his family demonstrates the hard work and ingenuity it took to not only survive, but prosper in the high desert. Welcome to Keyes Ranch. This historic area is strategically tucked in a remote, rocky canyon in the Mojave Desert. Bill Keyes and his family lived here from 1910 until 1969, but they weren't the first people to call this area home. It may be hard for visitors to imagine surviving in the desert, but we have evidence that Native Americans occupied this area for thousands of years. Right here on the property of Keyes Ranch, we have a site where Native Americans would have found food in the form of mesquite beans, acorns from the scrub oak, and nuts from this pinyon pine, water in this wash that may have washed down off the Wonderland of Rocks, and shelter here in this little alcove behind me. Here we're looking at a bedrock mortar. This is a spot where Native Americans would grind the acorns from the scrub oak or the seeds from the honey mesquite tree into a flour. You can see there's been a big well created from them grinding those seeds into flour over the years. In the mid-19th century, another group of people were drawn to this area. Imagine behind me grass growing hip high. This was an attractive place for cattlemen to bring their cows in the wintertime because it didn't get as cold here as it did other places. From about 400 years ago until the mid-1950s, this area received an average annual rainfall of 10 inches a year. In recent history, we've only received about 4 inches per year. Two cowboys that used this area in particular were Bill and James McCaney. These are cattle rustlers. They'd steal cattle in Los Angeles, bring them here to the secluded canyon, rebrand them, and then drive them east to Phoenix where they'd sell them. In Phoenix, they would steal more cattle, which they'd bring here, rebrand, and then drive on to Los Angeles. After running their cattle rustling operation for a little while, Bill and James heard about a very profitable gold mine located not too far from this canyon. It was called the Desert Queen Mine. Legend has it that they had a meeting with the owner of the Desert Queen Mine, and at the end of the meeting, the owner had been shot and the McCaney brothers had the deed to the mine. Bill's role in this operation was to dig ore out of the mine. James's job was to get that ore processed and then take the gold to pay off some loans that the brothers had. But James liked shopping more than he liked paying off loans, so eventually the bank foreclosed on the mine. The bank eventually sold Desert Queen Mine to an investor from Pasadena named Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan was a businessman, and he wasn't about to move to the desert and take up gold mining, so he hired a caretaker to live on this property and work the Desert Queen Mine. That caretaker's name was Bill Keyes.
And while the story that the Parks tell is a very wholesome account of William Keyes, there is another side to him that was very important to our story.
From the High Desert Star on February 15, 2019, a sign of long ago times, a new marker tells a story of a famous shootout. Here is where Worth Bagley bit the dust at the hands of W.F. Keyes on May 11, 1943. Bill Keyes chiseled those words into stone and erected it as a marker after he was released from San Quentin prison and returned to his home on the Desert Queen Ranch. The sign of a historic shootout between two pioneers. The marker stood for more than 70 years on the side of the trail leading out to Wall Street Mill and what is now known as Joshua Tree National Park. It's been struck by vandals several times, broken, and ultimately removed for safekeeping. But now, park visitors can once again see Keyes' words. Thanks to a replica of the original marker placed at the site, using photographs and detailed measurements, artist Rebecca Lowry recreated a design as close to the same outline and lettering of the original as possible. Lowry is the founder of JT Lab, a program that harnesses artists' creative power to help visitors engage in Joshua Tree National Park and Mojave National Preserve. Vagabond Welding helped fabricate the marker from 3/4-inch steel. The Park Service brought in descendants of Bill Keyes to participate in the project as well. Bill Keyes and Worth Bagley were neighbors around the area of the Wall Street Mill in the early 20th century. Keyes and his family lived on their Desert Queen Ranch, while Bagley and his 9th wife lived in a homestead in a rock alcove. Keyes, the owner of at least 30 mining claims over his lifetime, built a road leading to one of those claims on land that Bagley later bought. The two men became bitter enemies over their rights to the land. Keyes believed the road belonged to him and was determined to use it. Bagley put up a sign, "Keyes, this is my last warning to stay off of my property." On May 11, 1943, Keyes, then 64 years old, was driving back to his ranch when he spotted the sign. He got out for a closer look and saw Worth Bagley coming toward him, a pistol in his hand. According to his son Willis, Keyes ran back to his 1927 Dodge and grabbed a rifle. Bagley fired and missed, then turned to run away. Keyes, a better shot, sighted the rifle and shot Bagley dead. Keyes called it self-defense and an ambush and turned himself into authorities in 29 Palms later that day, but the law called it manslaughter. 7 weeks later, Keyes was convicted and sent to San Quentin on a 10-year sentence. His wife, Frances, wrote to one of her husband's old friends, Erie Stanley Gardner, a lawyer and the author of the Perry Mason novels. Gardner profiled the case in a magazine column he wrote called The Court of Last Resort about men who may have been convicted wrongfully. The column caught the public imagination, and a panel of volunteer experts re-examined the evidence and said that Keyes was wrongly convicted. With Gardner's help, Keyes received a full pardon after 5.5 years in prison. He returned to his family at the Desert Queen Ranch at age 69, carving in stone the marker of where his old enemy had bit the dust. Keyes was granted a full pardon in 1956, and he died in 1969. He's buried on the ranch beneath a headstone that he carved for himself.
And that's when I found out about the other bill. So the other bill, it's a story straight out of Hollywood. In fact, it includes some Hollywood types, including the author of Perry Mason, which is really interesting to me. The reason that I found out about them is they have a park tour where you can go. The only thing I was interested in is they had this old Jeep, like a pre-war Willie down there. I wanted to know what that was about. So the park tour, they take you down to the Desert Queen Ranch. And the Desert Queen Ranch was owned by a man from Russia who was born in the 1870s. His name is George Barth. However, when he got here, he changed his name to William Key. And then, not to be confused with John Key, who was one of the original settlers out there, he changes his name to William Keyes. And that is really where the story of Two Bills sort of begins.
And as is often the case, the beginning is also sort of the end, at least of this story and this killer. Next week, we'll be discussing Bailey's, we'll be discussing the suicide note, but we're going to leave you today with the rest of Meg's thoughts about why William Owasco's case, one of the two bills, was so important related to this killer.
So in 2010, he'd been all over the place as far as I was concerned. I had a couple of things I liked him for, a couple of things I didn't like the other people accused for. We really weren't 100% sure what to do once we found the case of Bill Owasco. So my first instinct was, all right, what's going on with the FBI timeline around the time this guy goes missing? So the last transaction that we can track is this Wichita, Kansas transaction, and that's on June 7th, 2010. On July 7th, 2010, he flies out of Anchorage to Seattle. And then when he flies out of Anchorage to Seattle, he then goes on to California. What was weird about that one was he has multiple car rentals. So he gets into Seattle on July 7th, and he has a car rental till July 9th, with just a few miles on it. On July 9th, he suddenly has a car rental out of Sacramento, California, on the north side, a couple of motel bills. He has Sacramento going back to Anchorage on July the 12th. And then he flies back to Denver, Colorado. Then there's travel records that get murky. And when I say murky, I mean the FBI was literally just saying, we don't know. They were marking them as unknown travel records. So we didn't know what to do with that period of time. We didn't know what to do with it, but we did know one really important thing, and that was Bill Owasco might be illuminating more than just one thing. And that could be he's illuminating some problems with the travel records. It could mean we're on the wrong track. But what it really did was it revealed that we were going to be able to search through maps and figure out where some of these people were. And that's the thing that stood out to Meg was now she was going to be able to really look. So she sends me the case of Bill Owasco, and I spend days going through it.
So what is my point exactly? When it comes to specifically naming possible victims of Israel Keys, to be perfectly clear, I don't know what happened to Bill Owasco. To sort of summarize, let's take Bill's name out of the equation, and let's just say that there's a 65-year-old man who went on a trip. During that trip, he visited a national park and was never seen again. On face value, I would say initially any 65-year-old man that goes missing could fall into a couple of categories. One of those categories would be someone who has walked away from their life. Typically, I don't see many people getting on a plane, renting a car, staying at a condo when they're looking to just disappear. The same is true for people who end up committing suicide. I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm just saying normally it doesn't happen. However, a lot of middle-aged men who go missing, I feel like it's by their own choice. Whether they've started over or they've committed suicide, it's something they've done to themselves. On the surface of Bill's disappearance, it may seem like one of those could fit. To me, though, it really didn't, primarily because we have so much information about what was happening to him after he had left home. He flew to LAX. He rented a car. He was staying at a friend's condo. He left an itinerary with his fiance. He left an itinerary in his vehicle. He left an itinerary at the condo. There was information about what he was going to be doing. Typically, when someone decides to disappear and then they go through with it, it's like Bill left home one day and we don't know what happened to him. It's not a detailed story like we have here. The other scenario that would apply to a 65-year-old man who went on a vacation, and during that vacation, he went to a national park to go on a day hike and he was never seen again, would be the lost hiker scenario. And in that scenario, it's completely benign. The person is out by themselves enjoying nature, and for whatever reason, they get off trail and eventually run out of supplies, and they end up dying from dehydration or exposure to the elements. The other possibility is that they didn't get lost, but somehow they got hurt or injured. And if they dropped dead from a heart attack, they would be in the general vicinity of the trail that they were were on, or at least close to it. If they were hurt in a way that incapacitated them, it seems to me like they would head back to where they knew help was as best they could for as long as they could. So when I think of that, I think of someone with a broken ankle crawling their way back down the trail. I don't know if that's what happens. I don't feel like the cases of missing people who are lost hikers, and it's genuinely just that they're lost hikers, I don't feel like they go out of their way to hide their bodies from potential search and rescuers. I don't know exactly what would occur in the situation where you're out in the wilderness, you are lost, you are without enough supplies, you run out, and so you're hungry and you're dehydrated. Or if you're facing some sort of medical condition that you're deteriorating from to the point that you're going to die. I don't know how quickly one realizes that. I'm sure it's a process that your body starts shutting down, and I think probably some people would recognize it sooner than others, and some people might die like still not realizing they were dying. I don't really know. It doesn't make sense unless you just go delirious to go hide. And because one typically wouldn't go hide under those circumstances, it seems like the body should be recovered in a reasonable period of time. And at this point in June 2020, we're 10 years out from when Bill Owasco disappeared. And that seems weird. So weird that I decided to look into what happens when someone goes missing in the wilderness, their typical reactions, what is the amount of time it normally takes for a legitimately lost hiker who dies from exposure or dehydration. How long does it take for them to normally be found? And as I was researching that, I didn't really learn too much about those particular topics, but I did learn quite a bit about the search for Bill Owasco. Confirmed what I was thinking. His case is really weird. There are groups of people who have been searching very diligently in a very well-documented manner since the official search ended. There still has been no trace of Bill Owasco ever found. Joshua Tree National Park is a place that people visit frequently, and a lot of those visitors are frequently looking for Bill Owasco while they're visiting the park. There's a treasure trove of information out there of reports of people going on searches for Bill. There are maps with GPS tracking marks indicating what areas have been searched for Bill. It's a very well documented effort, and it does not make any sense that he hasn't been found. In my teeny tiny bit of experience looking into these types of things, the search for Bill Owasco is the longest ongoing, most thoroughly documented search for a missing person that I've ever seen. The sources of the information are broad. They're volunteers who have gone out on their own specifically looking to find Bill Owasco. Somebody should have found something by now. There's no question in my mind about that. When we initially began this project, the very first thing I did was listen to all of the audio interview. Some of it's on video, but I listened to the audio. I listened to all of the audio of Israel Keyes talking with investigators. And during the course of his conversations and then answering questions, and then specifically when he was confessing to the Courier murder, I picked up on different things that he said. And I sort of stored them in my head. And after I had listened very carefully, repeatedly to all of the things that he said, I started looking into missing persons cases. And some of the things that I kept in mind were that Israel Keyes admitted to using people's vehicles. He stated that sometimes he would move the vehicles to put distance between himself and the crime. But he also describes during the Courier confession that he drove the Courier's vehicle to where his rental car was, and he transferred the stuff that he had collected from the Courier's home into his rental vehicle, straight from the Courier's vehicle. That conversation painted a picture in my head of Israel Key's rental car and the courier's car being very close together in a way that he would have access to both vehicles at once to quickly move the stuff. Sound familiar? He did that after he had committed the murder and shortly before he left the area. Israel Keys also indicated that he would use his victim's cell phone. Samantha Koenig's cell phone was recovered in the rental car that he was driving in Lufkin, Texas, when he was arrested in March of 2012. It was actually found in 2 pieces. It didn't have the battery attached, which has been cited as a strategic maneuver on his part to keep the phone from being tracked. We know that in Samantha Koenig's case, he used Samantha's cell phone to text information to her boyfriend that ultimately led to Connor Park, where they retrieved the ransom note. During his confession of the courier murders, he stated that he checked their cell phones and that they didn't really have a convenient way to text on them, and that he couldn't really find contact information that he thought enough of to start the ransom process with them. He also mentions that while he had the phones after he had killed the couriers, he was a little amused that they kept receiving phone calls from one of their workplaces. He assumed that it was somebody looking for them. And ultimately, he ended up burning their cell phones with the rest of the stuff that he had taken from their home. But he didn't do that until he was well out of Vermont and up into New Hampshire. That created the picture in my head of Israel Keys feeling like he had gotten away with something, powering on his victim's cell phone one last time to relish in any sort of sign that the victim was already being missed by their loved ones or by anyone in their life. Before destroying it, he also indicated that back when he was smart, he let his victims come to him. And when pushed further, he briefly elaborated, when one goes to a remote area where other people also go, when the other person goes missing, it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. That statement is very eerie and sort of illustrates him as a monster. But while the statement is no doubt haunting and sort of radiates a lot about Israel Keys and the crimes that he committed, the statement itself isn't actually true. In reality, there are very few people who go missing in a remote area, which I took to mean a wilderness type environment, that aren't recovered eventually. It can take time, depending on different circumstances, but eventually people are found, or something of theirs is found, and a plausible explanation comes together about what might have happened to them. The cases I came across while researching this project that people hadn't been found when they really should have, well, they're what I refer to as Wallies. And while I don't have any evidence to prove what happened to Bill Owasco, he is the ultimate Wally. Keys also confidently on more than one occasion expressed that while the FBI or any other agency looking into his possible crimes might find some things, they would never find enough to link it to him successfully. That was him saying that when you come across a case where a person has gone missing and nothing is ever recovered of them and there's no plausible explanation, you may have found one of my victims. With the mindset that a person in a remote area going missing, never being recovered, happens all the time, I feel like he probably overshot and ended up disposing of too much. That in and of itself would be a clue that would point straight to Israel Keys, at least back when he was smart.
I knew there was a puzzle there, and I was hoping that we could solve it. If we put enough people's heads together that we could look at it. We weren't working with like the full picture. We were working with what was dribbled out to us. And then I realized something with Tyler Wright, and later on, to a greater extent, Bill Owasco which was Meg's find. She's the one who brought it to my attention. I realized that people cared. People didn't just want to solve the puzzle. They cared. And in some weird way, they didn't all know what exactly they cared about. They just wanted to solve something. They wanted to find them. You know, I picked up this case 3 times. First time was like right after it happened. I realized it wasn't really much to do. Second time was because a couple of books had dribbled out. One, it's more of a pamphlet, one's a book. And, you know, along the way, Meg had given me Missing 411, and I read that, and the Bigfoot space portal thing was so interesting to me. And I was like, maybe it's something like that, but plausible. That's how I put it. And I put it back down because I was like, there's just nothing we can do here. Like, they're not ever going to give us this information. So when I picked it up the third time, I thought, well, I'll take a run at it. And I almost put it down because other people were covering it. American Predator came out. Meg got involved. Somewhere along the way, there were podcasts about it, like one-offs and one, you know, really good full season. But looking at it all, total, I realized something about all of them. All the talking heads and all the people, no matter how good a storyteller they were trying to tell this story. They all bought it. They all bought what he was selling. Every one of them. FBI, all the lawyers, everybody bought it. It wasn't me. I probably would have bought it. That's probably why I didn't follow up on it. but Meg didn't like what she thought was being sold. So here we are.
Because of my work and because of Meg's work and because of us working together, he did leave a puzzle to solve. I don't know if he left the puzzle on purpose. And it's not encrypted. It's just sort of scattered and all over the place. There's elements that are related to the suicide note. There's these elements where we knew it was just a few words that would make the difference. That probably meant a common body disposal site. And we knew he'd done a lot of stuff. So when we looked at it as a puzzle to solve, well, that made it a whole new thing.
I'm being totally serious when I say this. The only thing I like more than finding a thing that nobody else could find is solving a puzzle.
Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And don't forget, on July 3rd, we are literally revealing where the bodies are buried. See you next week.
This is True Crime XS.
I've been chasing mountains I can't climb, holding out for heroes in the night. I find myself here in the dark. We learn to fight and learn who we are, but I am raised up to face the stars, full of light, and we are makes you shiver, and I chase the winter out of my mind like dark in the distance. We are wild. Standing at the edge of a great sea. Sometimes it takes all you got to believe that you are whole here in the dark. We learn to fight when we fall apart, but we are raised up to face the stars. Endless light, and we are wild like a river, wild like the fire in your veins makes you shiver. And I chase the winter out of my mind like the dark in the distance. We are wild. Can't hold me back, can't pin me down. Can't stop the truth from ringing out. Light up the darkness, say it loud. Oh, I am stronger, I am wild. We are wild. We are wild. We are wild. We are wild like a river, wild like the fire in your veins makes you shiver. And I chase the winter